Pleasant meeting at the mall. At 18, my best friend Katie was embarrassed that she was still a virgin, especially after I had lost my virginity. A few months before, I had lost my virginity to a man I had met during a summer job. His name was Mark, and he was about 10 years older than me. Mark never took me out on dates. He would show up at our house on Sunday mornings, when he knew my family was at church, and take me as he pleased. I was young, naive, and desperate to have a boyfriend. I was thrilled that he liked me, and did whatever he asked. I didn't realize it at the time, but Mark wasn't interested in dating me. All he wanted was me, and I was easy prey. He not only took my virginity, but trained me to be his submissive plaything. In those few months, I went from knowing nothing about the business to being experienced in everything imaginable. I had very low self-esteem, and Mark used that to his advantage. I had been taught that my role as a girl was to please my man in any way he wished. His training started my promiscuity for many years to come. I had no idea what a real relationship was. Katie and I had been best friends since first grade and were inseparable. We told each other everything. Throughout our ordeal with Mark, I told her every racy detail. I was on the phone with Kathy as soon as Mark was out the door. I swear we discussed every detail and every act at least 100 times. Kathy was so fixated on my relationship that she admitted to touching herself every night thinking about what had happened. Yes, Katie needed to lose her virginity immediately. Katie's virginity and lack of experience became a priority. After much discussion, we eventually came up with a plan. Like me, she had developed at a later age, but was now ready to lose her virginity. Being her best friend, I decided to help her in any way I could. After all, what are best friends for? Katie was very sweet and outgoing. All the boys liked Katie. I liked spending time with Katie because she was fun and attracted a lot of boys. I, on the other hand, was always reserved and quiet. The fact that I lost my virginity before Kathy did puzzled me. In those days, we were too young for bars, so our hangout spot was the local mall. We spent every weekend there and flirted with the boys. We met a couple of boys, Rob and Mike. Kathy and I liked Rob, as he was prettier. But since our mission was for Kathy to lose her virginity, I insisted that she get Rob. And I got Mike. I wasn't thrilled with Mike, but it wasn't about me. I had to do my part to make it happen for Kathy. We spent hours talking about Rob. He seemed like the perfect guy for Katie to lose her virginity to. He was cute, funny, our age, and went to a different school than us, so it would be discreet. It was decided that Rob was the one. My parents were heavily involved in the life of the church. Every Saturday night, they participated in church activities. This meant that the house was at my disposal. So Kathy and I came up with a plan to meet the guys at the mall, and if all went well, Kathy would signal me and we would invite the guys back to the house. The plan was ready to go. Short denim shorts, braless tops, and high wedge shoes were our standard attire in those days. We spent hours tousling our hair and applying makeup. We did our best to look sexy before heading to the mall. In the evening, we met up with the guys at the mall and chatted with them. Kathy was having fun with Rob and seemed to be getting along great with him. Everything was going according to plan, except she wouldn't give me the signal to go back to the house. I was beginning to worry that she was being cowardly. Time was running out, as my parents were due, back in a couple hours. Mike was a serious man. We talked about a lot of things, but honestly, there was no spark between us. He was fixated on my breasts and couldn't take his eyes off them. I'd always had them very lush, but his constant stares made them erect and even more noticeable through the tight, flimsy top. I had no intention of doing this with Mike, but for Katie's sake, I had to keep him interested. Katie and I looked into each other's eyes, and it looked like she was finally ready to take the next step. I suggested that everyone come back to my place since my parents weren't home. The guys looked surprised, but quickly agreed. We went back into the house and went straight to the basement TV room. This was my space. My older sister had left home years ago, and my younger sister was 7 years younger than me, so I took the basement space. It was nothing special, an old couch, an armchair, and a TV, but the best part was that it allowed me privacy from my parents. The plan was simple. If things went well with Katie and me, I would take Mike upstairs so Katie could have some privacy and hopefully accomplish our mission to take her virginity. I dimmed the lights and we both sat down on opposite ends of the couch and started making out with our boyfriends. There were barely 4 people on the couch, so it was a little crowded. The guys positioned themselves on each end of the couch, and Katie and I sat side by side in the middle. We started making out. I wanted to take my time with Mike, but he was very aggressive. Kathy and I stood with our backs to each other, and since this day was all about Kathy, I wanted to follow up on how things were going with Rob. I allowed myself to lean back on the back of the couch so I could see Kathy. No matter how hard I tried to fight Mike off, he ran his hand up my top and pulled and grabbed my breasts. I saw Rob furtively glancing at me as he played with Katie. I had to admit, it was turning me on. After a while of kissing and caressing, I could see that Katie and Rob's relationship had heated up to the max. Rob finally slipped his hand into her top, and Kathy began to rub his groin and breasts. I watched as Kathy's top pulled up, and her small, tangy breasts showed from underneath. I have to admit that as I watched them, I felt aroused. I hadn't been with a guy since Mark, and I have to say, I was really turned on watching them kiss. I was jealous of Kathy, as I would have loved to possess Rob. It looked like it was time, and I struggled to get up from the couch, pulling myself out of Mike's embrace and straightening my top. I took Mike's hand and led him up the stairs to the main floor. He followed me like a little puppy drooling for a reward. Once upstairs, I started to stall, going into the restroom and talking. But soon he pulled me onto the couch in the living room, and we started making out. At this point, the phone started ringing and ringing. I ignored it, but whoever it was called back again and again. Finally, I picked up the phone. It was Katie's mom, and she needed to talk to Katie right away. It sounded serious, and I ran downstairs to hand the phone to Katie. Katie was lying on the couch completely unclothed, and Rob was lying on top of her. Rob was shirtless, and as he stood up, I couldn't help but notice the bulge on his pants. Katie quickly pulled herself together and answered the phone. I couldn't help but notice how swollen and flushed her cheeks were as she sat topless on the phone. Suddenly, she jumped up, grabbed her top, and announced that there was a family emergency and she needed to go home. She immediately ran up the stairs and out of the house. I was in shock. I looked at Rob and he too was at a loss for words. Mike heard the noise and came downstairs. I was standing in the TV room alone with 2 horny guys. We just stared at each other in silence. Shit, now what? I was suddenly nervous, finding myself alone in a house with 2 guys. It wasn't a good situation. I suggested they leave and we could try another time when Kathy was free. They didn't want to leave and suggested we wait to see if Kathy would come back. I expressed doubt that she would be back. Besides, my parents would be back soon. At that moment, Mike grabbed me and pulled me back to the couch. He wasn't going to leave. I didn't know what to do, as he easily overpowered me. While I struggled, he continued where we left off upstairs. I wasn't really interested in Mike, since he and I had been paired up so that Katie could lose her virginity to Rob. But now, that plan was falling apart. I resisted his advances, hoping to figure out a way to get them out of the house. He started fondling my breasts again. I thought that maybe if I let him fondle me for a while, he would be satisfied and leave. The kissing and fighting continued. While I was wrestling with Mike on the couch, I'd forgotten about Rob. As I turned to change positions, I noticed Rob sitting in a chair across from the couch, watching intently. He was only about 6 feet away from me. The fact that he was watching me so intently flicked some kind of switch in me. I immediately became aroused. I'd never had a guy watch me before. He just stared at me while Mike tried to handle my breasts. Our eyes met and locked. There was desire in his eyes. Damn it, he was so cute. I wanted to kiss him, not Mike. I could see him trying to look down my chest as Mike tried to lift my top. While Rob watched, I let my guard down and let Mike lift my top, exposing part of my breasts to both him and Rob. I saw Rob's eyes almost pop out as he leaned closer. My breasts were fuller and more developed than Katie's. It occurred to me that Rob liked what he was seeing. Did he really have a crush on me? Mike was touching me, and I fantasized that it was Rob touching me. I felt myself getting wet as Mike pulled and pinched my thighs. I wanted Rob so badly. He was right in front of me, but what about Mike? I was very timid at that moment, but my desire and lust for Rob overcame my shyness. And with a nod of my head, I invited him over to the couch. He immediately moved to the couch and sat on the other side of me. I sat on the couch with 2 guys alone in the house. What was I thinking? Rob just sat there and watched politely. While Mike kissed my breasts, I reached behind me, took Rob's hand and moved it to my waist. He took the hint and was soon kissing my neck and fondling my breasts. From the front, I fought Mike off, and from behind, I let Rob take his. I reached back and started touching Rob's crotch. I could feel that he was already good and hard. At first, Mike was too busy with my breasts to notice it, but when he didn't seem to mind. It was the first time two guys held my hands. The sensation of having their hands all over me was incredible. My breasts were being groped, pulled, and licked on my erect breasts. Someone ran their hand between my bare thighs. My crotch was being stimulated through my shorts. I was enjoying all this attention when Rob got involved. Things were heating up fast. Mike unbuttoned my shorts and started pulling them up. I had to stop it before things got out of control. It was getting late, and I knew my parents would be home soon. If my dad caught me having a threesome in the basement, it wouldn't be good. I managed to pull away from them and stood up. I announced that my parents would be home soon and they needed to leave. There was silence. Then Mike grabbed my arm and pulled me back to the couch. The struggle continued. They didn't believe my parents were coming home and they weren't going to leave. This time, I found myself face to face with Rob. I was finally able to kiss him when Mike grabbed both my breasts from behind. Unable to resist, I immediately unzipped the zipper on Rob's pants and reached inside to take his hard device. He gasped as I grabbed him and freed him from his underpants. I'm sure he hadn't expected me to do that. I had only seen one cock up to this point, and now I was dying to see Rob's device. He had a beautiful device. It was so smooth and thicker than Marx's. I put my tiny hand around it and squeezed it tightly. I could feel the blood rushing to him, making him throb in my hand. I began to stroke him slowly when he let out a low moan. What was I thinking? My head was telling me to stop, because my parents would be home soon, but my emotions wanted Rob so badly. I was losing control. I could feel the lust and juices flowing with every stroke. I remembered that if Mike wasn't here, I'd probably be doing it with Rob right now. Finally, the small amount of blood rushing to my brain made me stop. I pulled away from both of them and ran to the other end of the room to get some distance. I begged them to leave, but they were unwilling to do so. They were like wild animals smelling blood. They wanted more. I told them there was no way I was going to do it with them when I expected my parents to return any minute. Of course, they didn't believe me. Finally, in sheer desperation, I blurted it out. Okay, I'll do each of you a hand job if you promise to leave. They were stunned by my suggestion and just looked at each other in bewilderment. Then Mike, being aggressive, fired back. Well, yes, we want it. At this point, I was almost in a panic. If my father discovered the two boys in the basement with me, I would be grounded for the rest of the year, if not longer. In addition, I would lose the privilege of having the TV room in the basement as my personal space. It never left me feeling like my father had kicked my older sister out of the house for much less. Yes, I was afraid of my father, as he was very strict and religious. After a moment's pause, I said, "Okay." Silence and disbelief appeared on the boys' faces. I'm sure my decision depended a lot on the lust I felt for Rob. They just stared at me, not knowing what to do. I stood in front of them both, took off my top, and ordered them to drop their pants. They both froze, staring at my tits. I'm pretty sure they'd never done this before. I'm also pretty sure they didn't expect me to say yes. I pulled myself together and said, "Well, what are you waiting for?" They both jumped up off the couch and started pulling down their pants. I ordered them to sit back down on the couch. I was now in control of the situation. I knelt down in front of them and took both devices in my hands. I started stroking them at the same time. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I felt my power over them, and I liked it. With Mark, he was always in control, and I just obeyed his demands. Now I was making my own demands, and the guys were obeying me. I had just discovered the power that every woman had over a man. This was a turning point in my journey. From that moment on, I began to refine and hone my power over men. Although I didn't realize it at the time, this event was a turning point for me. The guys didn't even realize I had experience. If anything, Mark had taught me well how to pleasure a man. I guess he made me an easygoing girl. At that point, I still didn't have a real boyfriend, and I didn't know what a real relationship should be like. From my experience with Mark, I still believed that a girl's role was to satisfy a man in any way she could. After all the foreplay this evening, it didn't take them long to finish it off. I did it to Rob first, and a minute later, he finished in my mouth with a loud, deep sound. I could feel his device spasming as I did it to him. Taking my time, I licked his shaft thoroughly and swallowed his entire portion, just like Mark had taught me. It impressed the hell out of both of them. Now it was Mike's turn. While I was satisfying him, I was still playing with Rob's device in my hand. It took Mike a little longer to finish it, but he did. He splashed ropes and ropes all over my breasts, hair and face. He was obsessed with my breasts and reached down and smeared his pride all over them. I wasn't impressed with the mess he made. Then I turned to Rob, who was hard again. I had already held up my end of the bargain, but I couldn't contain the lust I felt. I wanted more of Rob, so I did it to him again. This time he ejaculated for much longer, and I was already really getting into it. While I was doing him, Mike got up off the couch and settled in behind me. He stroked my breasts while I worked on Rob. Mike unbuttoned my shorts and tried to pull them down. I groaned in disapproval. Mike wanted more. He pulled my shorts down to my thighs. I quickly ordered him back to the couch, and to my surprise, he obeyed. I was fascinated by how quickly they both came around. I started giving them both hand massages. I was curious to see how many times I could get them to enjoy it. I was so engrossed in them that I lost track of time. At that moment, we saw the headlights of a car coming up the driveway. I jumped up and yelled for them to get out. The boys hastily put on their pants and ran out the back door when the car was already parked in the garage. It looked like a scene from a comedy movie, but there was nothing funny about the panic I was feeling. They managed to run out just as my parents entered the house through the front door. I was a mess. I quickly put on my top, but noticed that semen was everywhere. In my hair, on my face, on my breasts, that had just soaked my top, come on the couch, on the carpet, on the coffee table. The whole basement smelled like male sex hormones. I ran to the stairs to make sure no one was coming down. I shouted hello to them and told them I was the only one watching TV. What a nuisance that was. I spent the rest of the evening cleaning up. Later that evening, Kathy called me and apologized for leaving me there with both guys. She wanted to know what had happened. I knew that Kathy really liked Rob, so I didn't have the heart to tell her what had happened. I just told her that they both left right after she left. About a week later, Rob asked me out on a date. I wanted him to be my first real boyfriend so badly, but I was torn because I knew that Kathy really liked him too. Guilt took over and I turned him down. How could I explain to Kathy that I was seeing Rob? I valued Kathy's friendship too much, but I told Rob that I would spend time with him if he wanted to, the next time I had a free house. He happily agreed. A couple of weeks later, he came over and we did it in the basement. We had many lustful moments together. He was the second guy I'd ever had it with. But again, I never went on a date with Rob. It was the same as with Mark, just vulgarity. It just went on and on. I felt bad about sneaking around with Rob because Kathy liked him. I never said anything to Kathy. A few months later, Katie lost her virginity to a guy we had known since high school. A year later, she married him. I couldn't believe they had gotten married at such a young age, but I was happy for her.